Mashad, Sikh Vida Suwaklam, all you people, relatives and friends. My name is Fighting Woman, and I am the daughter of the SeaMonster. And I am Snohomish. I am Snohomish. I am Snohomish. And a tootie too hot, a long time ago, before the settlers were here, the Indigenous hung. There were people who left the earth in the trees. They hung them there in spirit canoes, inside of cedar woven bags, or the ulal, the cattail reeds. And they waited for their bodies to swell and pop from the carrion birds. And their bodies and their guts would run down the trees and go into the roots. Oh, we became the trees. And when we dried out, the north wind would come and blow our bones out onto the ground. And the wolves and the coyotes and the bears and the mountain lions would take our pieces away. And the canoe would get brought back down and cleaned and waited for the next person to leave this earth. And that was the way of the people. But when the settlers came, we weren't allowed to do that anymore. Settlers came to places like this in 1905, just 50 years after the Indian Wars, and came up with their wagons and dropped their dead off in boxes to be put in the ground. They put them down into the basement of this building to wait. They would rob the canoes that come in the trees. They would rob the spirit canoes and take them. They would rob the items that were left for that person to take into the spirit world with them for their dear journey. They wanted us to be like them. They wanted us to lay in boxes in the ground. And so we started putting our dead in boxes made of cedar with an open hole. We never wanted their spirit not to be able to leave the earth. And so we would put planks, like a Boy Scout tent, with two open ends, so that their spirit could choose to leave. So it could have that year's time to travel to the east, where all life begins. But you know, the settlers, they kept robbing the bodies. And so today we suffer a spiritual genocide. We suffer a spiritual genocide. We must be like the settlers. We must embalm the bodies. We must not let them decay and return to Mother Earth and become the trees or the medicine for the people. No. Or we must burn the bodies. We must burn them and make them sterile and no good to anything. Much like Mr. Collins, who killed 2 Snohomish Indians not far from here in 1854. He killed them and hung them, and it was exonerated for it. Was exonerated. But you know, we had a darkness, I should say. A darkness that was far darker than Mr. Collins could ever be. Her name was Basket-Oatress. And she was a giantess. And she had giant fat balls under her arms. And she would swing them when she was dancing. And she would sing a song, but through the snot in her nose. I'm gonna eat the little one. I'm gonna eat the little one. Her hands were like talons, and they were bloody with the blood of children. She was always lying in wait for children who were wayward, children who weren't listening to their Chayas and their Sapas, their grandmas and their grandpas, their moms and their dads. Children who would run off into the woods, run off into the dark, run off into the night, much like Mr. Collins' child. maybe she got that baby. She would wait with berries in her hands, and the minute a child would reach out for the berries or put them in their mouth, they would fall asleep. And she would grab them and put them in her basket. She had a band that went down and hung over her back, as if she was berry picking, but she was child picking. And her basket was made of snakes. And she would sing when she got those children. I'm gonna eat the little ones, and all that snot and all that blood would fall down onto her feet. She had the grossest toe jam ever. Oh, it was so bad. But one day, she wasn't so sure she wanted to eat children anymore. And that darkness didn't feel so good. And so she decided she was going to go see her Chaya, her grandmother. Now, basket overs lived over here in Tiswak, what is now called Tahoma. The new people call them Rainier. And her Chaya lived in another Tahoma, a mountain that always had snow. The new people call it Baker. And her Chaya lived along the Nooksack River, and so she came down and she carried her own canoe. She was so big. Ooh. She could come down the rivers and the streams in her canoe, and then when she'd get close to a village, she'd say, I'm gonna go see Chaya, so she could keep her thoughts in one place and keep her thoughts on her grandmother and getting there. Because maybe those children didn't taste as good as they used to. And off she went. And pretty soon she arrived in a place outside of a village along the Nooksack River that her grandmother always put a drying hut for medicine. Her grandmother gathered medicine all summer long and dried them in a small hut covered with ulal, the cattail reeds. And inside there was a small fire to dry the herbs, the medicine, to take care of the people for the winter, so that the people might live. And she reached down and she looked inside that hut, and her Chaya wasn't there. And so she decided she should wait. So she crawled in and hovered with her hands over the fire, drying the blood. She waited, and pretty soon her Chaya came back from gathering, and the closer she got to her medicine hut, oh, the stench of death. Ooh, that was horrible. And the closer and closer she realized that stench was coming out of her medicine hut. Ooh, you know our grandmothers, they're fierce, they don't care. So she went forward and she opened the door of her medicine hut and looked in. And basket overs turned her head and said, Chaya! Ooh, I love that hut. And basket overs said it again, Chaya! Oh, and that Chaya, she was brave. She grabbed those bloody, dry hands, and she ripped basket overs out, crawling her out on her knees. And she looked in the eyes of the basket overs, and she said, Grandpa, is that you? The basket overs only answered, Chaya. And that grandma, she ripped that woman on her knees and took her down to the Nooksack. Began to cry over the hair of the basket overs that was matted with snot and blood. And she cried and she cried and she cried, and pretty soon she cried so much that the snot fell out of basket overs' nose and fell into the Nooksack River and became little silver salmon. You might eat them today. And she cried and she cried and she cried over the basket overs. She cleaned her hands, and when the blood fell from her grandmother's tears into the Nooksack River, they popped up and became mosquitoes. They still bloodsucked. Oh, and she cried and she cried and she cried. And pretty soon, the nasty Chojam was gone, and Basket Ogress was a human woman. And together they cried over that basket. They cried over that basket, and that basket turned back into cedar bark. And the smell of medicine permeated from that basket. Our grandparents have an amazing way to change lives. They are the echoes of our ancestors. Our ancestors are in the trees, still today. Basket Ogress, that one might be gone, but there are 3 more. Be watchful. Yo soy.